and welcome back to my channel, where I'm going to cover the Rogue's Soulknife class specialization from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, providing a brief description of the subclass, as well as explain and set up the various features gained. The Soulknife class specialization is to the Rogue what the Psi Warrior is to fighters. It brings the ability to use psionics to the Rogue class, using the same concepts of the Psi Warrior to represent the psionic power through dice. Rogues of this subclass are highly sought after for government-related spy positions, as well as the various thieves guilds because of their psionic capabilities. As such, any player who takes this subclass may be given an alternate goal than what the rest of the party may have, or at the very least may be working with the party but also working towards the goals of some organization at the same time. Rogues get to select their archetype at level 3, thus giving you time to make up your mind. But before we start looking at the features, let's go ahead and level up our example character here by dropping the actual class onto our level here. And we want to ensure we select Soulknife. The first feature your character will receive is called Psionic Power, and it's what gives your character the means to make use of your psionic capabilities. The psionic die are expended much like sorcery points are spent for a sorcerer, so we'll be able to make use of the same kind of setup I've recently used for some of the new sorcerer-based subclasses within this particular class. There are a total of 2 times your proficiency bonus for the total number of psionic dice your character will have, and initially each dice is made up of a d6 die. However, this does change at levels 5, 11, and 17, where they will increase to d8, d10, and d12 respectively. Your character will be able to take advantage of 2 powers initially provided by this feature, which are called Psi-Bolstered Knack and Psychic Whispers. But before I go into each of the options, I want to ensure that I have an actual power group set aside for us for the capabilities of our psionic abilities. So I dragged in our psionic power into our action sheet. I'm going to rename the power group that it's in by altering this group field here to Psionic Power. And that'll create this new power group. And I'm going to leave the name here as it is for the time being, and then go ahead and cover each of the options in a moment. Before I do that though, I want to make sure that this is going to be set up appropriately. A rogue's primary stat is their dexterity, which means we need to ensure that we have our ability score set as dexterity. And we will see where that gets used in a couple of features a little bit later on when we start covering those. The next thing we want to do is set up the daily use, and as it indicated earlier, our daily use is 2 times our proficiency bonus, which means at this particular point in time for a level 3 rogue, it is going to be a total of 4 daily uses. And that finalizes the setup of the power group itself. So now we can go ahead and start taking a look at the options that come with this particular feature. And the first option is called Psi-Bolstered Knack, and with this ability, you'll be able to add one of the rolls of your psionic die to an ability check or tool check that your character is proficient in the event that they actually failed that check. If the failure turns into a success, only then do you indicate the expenditure of the psionic dice usage, which we will show you how that works once we go through and set this up. So the first thing I want to do is rename this psionic power here to actually be Psi-Bolstered Knack. And that's just going to showcase that in the chat whenever you use this feature. The next thing I want to do is add a new effect. And I'm going to go ahead and just simply copy and paste something I've already prepared. It's going to state Psi-Bolstered Knack, semicolon, check, all in capital letters, colon, 1d6, because that's the die, the size of the die, I should say, at our current level. This is only going to work on your character. It cannot be granted to any other character, and it should expire on the next roll. So the way this is going to work is as follows. Let's say that our character is being requested to make an ability check. And what we'll want to do is limit this to any ability check that we are proficient in. It will not apply to anything that you are not proficient in. That also includes anything that you have to do for tools. So if you're making a check with your thieves tools, as long as that tool is listed in your proficiencies listing here, you'll be able to add the ability here to this particular roll. When you're required to make that roll, the first thing you'll want to do is add this effect to your character. And regardless of whether you're making a tool check or the proficient ability score check here, you will want to make sure that that's in place. So let's say that I'm being asked to make a deception check. Well, I'm going to go ahead and roll this, and you will see that we get the extra 1d6 die added to our dice. But there is an issue with this. This implies that your expectation is you're going to fail your ability score check, or your tools ability check. That's not how this particular feature is intended to be used, and I'm showcasing this because this is actually the incorrect way to do this. Anyone who has experience with setting up abilities and effects inside of Fantasy Grounds is going to consider this as their first option. But it's actually the incorrect option. But I'm also showcasing this because this is how some DMs might actually want you to go and set things up. So while this is going to work, there's going to be some things you'll have to do after the fact. The first is you will have to focus on the value of this dice roll here, mainly the d20 roll. If it was a failure, then you will be able to get to add this ability score here and confirm that you did in fact succeed or turn this into a success. If that is the case, then and only then you tick off that you use this ability. The proper way to actually make use of this ability is going to be as follows. Don't use this. Simply make your ability score check. In this case, I most likely succeeded. So let me re-roll so I can get a failure. Well, that's still going to most likely be a success. I'll just keep going down until I get a failure. There we go. This is most likely going to fail. At this particular point in time, you're going to want to pick up this 1d6, as long as you're indicating that you're using this ability, and then roll it in the chat box. And it has to be rolled in the chat box. You're then going to add the 4 to the total of 8, and hopefully, in this particular case, maybe you needed to roll a 10, for example, it turns this into a success. If the total amount does in fact turn this into a success, then you would go ahead and tick off that you use this ability. And the reason why I say this is the right way to do it is because of the wording within this option. It states, if you fail an ability check using a skill or tool with which you have proficiency. That means you actually have to fail the check first before you can use the dice roll. Whereas this is going to make use of Fantasy Grounds' automation for you. The problem with this is that that automation is still going to get used regardless of whether you succeeded or failed on your ability check. So my recommendation is to stick with the manual option when it comes to using this feature. There are some DMs that will still want you to set it up this way though, so I'm leaving this in place to showcase that. Now I'm going to circle back to when you actually use this, because you may recall I indicated that only do you tick this off if you have already used your Psionic ability. And that is because of the wording here at the bottom of this particular feature, and that is the first time you use this power after each long rest, you don't expend the Psionic energy die. Meaning that if you've used the Psionic power earlier in the day, but you have not completed another long rest in between that use and the use that you're currently doing, you take this off. However, if this is the first time you're using your Psionic ability, and that is going to apply to any of these features later on, you don't take this off. You get a free use. So we're going to set up a second ability under the Soulknife group here in order to be able to represent that. But we will do that once I've covered Psychic Whispers. With the Psychic Whispers, your character will be able to make use of a telepathic means of communication between a number of creatures equal to your proficiency bonus. That means that at level 3, your character has a proficiency bonus of 2. That means you can communicate with 2 other creatures. Once the creatures are chosen, you will then need to roll one of your psionic die, and that will give you the total number of hours that the telepathic speaking capability will last, as long as each of those creatures remains within 1 mile of your character. For example, let's say that your character was linked to another rogue who's 1.5 miles out, and a ranger who's just under 1 mile out from where your character currently stands. Then your character would not be able to talk directly to the rogue until they return to a location that is less than 1 mile from your character. So the link will remain intact, but the ability to communicate will wax and wane if your linked team members move in and out of that range, and it will continue to do so until the number of hours itself has expired. Communicating this way uses no action, but all members must be able to speak a language, though it doesn't have to be the same. So you could have 3 different characters or creatures talking 3 different languages, and they will still be able to understand each other. And the other thing is that a creature can choose to drop the telepathic link without needing to make use of an action as well. So, to set this up, we're going to want to open up this particular feature here. and then just drop it back into place. And the reason why isn't because of what the previous setup has done for us, outside of the fact that this particular ability is already linked into the psionic power group. So if you take an ability that is linked to a group and drag it back in, you get a second copy automatically with the actual ability that you have. I am then going to rename this particular ability here be Psionic Psychic Whispers. And I will remove this particular effect here. So I'm going to remove that action because there is no action that is taken here. And there's a reason why I've set it up as this power group, and that is because of the linked expenditure. As you can see, it doesn't matter which of these two options I select, because they share the psychic or psionic power capabilities. As you tick off an expenditure, both of the actual features or abilities here get an item that is ticked off. The ones that you didn't activate it in get a slightly grayed out version of the checkmark here, whereas the ones that you used and activated the ability with get the full opaque version of that checkmark. So that will set up our expenditure rolls, if you will. Let's go ahead and set it up for the ability of our single free use. So what I'm going to do is drag this into here to get a blank group, if you will. I'm going to call this Soulknife. And the reason why I'm doing it this way is as follows. I don't care what ability I am linking here. I'm just tracking my free use. So I'm going to go ahead and set up one daily use of this psychic power or psionic power. I'm going to leave this as it is, but I will clear out these checkboxes. And the reason being is simply to cover this. I'm going to be, let's say, using Psi-Bolstered Knack here in this particular case, but it's the first time I'm using it for the day. What I want to do is tick this off. Then I'm going to go ahead and apply the effect to my character and then go ahead and make my ability check roll if the DM is doing it this way, or go ahead and make my ability check roll if the DM's not doing it that way. And if I fail, then and only then do I actually roll this dice. But there's one thing I still want to point out about this particular ability, because this is one of the most complicated features this game has to offer. The only time you actually tick off a use when you're using Psi-Bolstered Knack is if and only if Psi-Bolstered Knack actually turns a failure into success. And that's stated right here. You expend the die only if the roll succeeds. That also includes your free use, which means that if this didn't turn a failed saving throw, or ability check, I should say, into a success, you don't make use of that feature. You get to keep that around. So you can continue to use Psi-Bolstered Knack as often as you want, as long as it doesn't turn something into a success. Now, when it comes to the use of Psychic Whispers, you still get your free use. But there's no indication here about not using it. So if you're going to use this particular feature, you still expend your energy die. So you get your free use first, then you start burning through your actual psychic dice. When you do use this, and after you have chosen the creatures that you're going to link to, then and only then do you roll your d6 or your d8, d12, 10, or d12, because it's going to link to your psychic dice, to gain the number of hours that particular psychic whisper remains. There is one thing I forgot in relation to psionic power, and that is recovery of your energy dice. It is completed with a long rest. That's the reason why I set this power group up for daily uses. But you do get the ability to recover one energy die as a bonus action during a combat run if you really wanted to. So I actually need to set up something else to reflect that. I'm going to go ahead and copy Soulknife group here and add this to this particular ability that I just dropped into place. I am then going to rename this to regain energy die, or psionic energy, I should say. Psionic energy. And set this up to be one rest use. And that's because you can use this to regain an energy die and then simply complete a short or a long rest in order to regain the ability to do so again. Now, let's say that you've gone through and you've burned through most of your energy die here. Well, if you haven't already used this ability, you can tick that off and regain one of your energy die. If you then complete a short rest, you'll be able to have this ability come back again, and then you get to use it again. So it's a way of completing short rests and being able to recoup energy die at least in theory once per combat round if you complete short rests between each combat round. Now, if you complete a long rest, then all of your energy die will return, as will this particular ability here. Another feature your character gains at level 3 is called Psychic Blades, giving you the ability to create a manifested blade of energy that you can use as a melee weapon or as a thrown weapon. This blade uses your normal attack roll, but because it's going to have the finesse property, it means you get to choose to either use your strength or your dexterity modifier for your attack and damage rolls. It can be thrown no farther than 60 feet, and it's a normal throwing range, so there's no disadvantage in play if you toss it out that far due to its range, unlike other ranged weapons such as a longbow that have a short and a long range associated with them. This one simply has the single range. When it hits, it will do 1d6 points of psychic damage, in addition to the total modifier used for the attack roll. So if you chose to use your character's dexterity for the attack ability, and added its modifier to the attack roll, you can also add that modifier to the damage done when the blade hit. As a bonus action, if you choose to use the Psychic Blade to attack as your primary attack, your character can use this feature again using their offhand as long as that offhand is empty without a penalty applied to the attack roll. However, unlike the primary attack, the amount of damage this attack does is 1d4 points of damage plus your character's attack modifier. In either case, the blades will vanish after each attack, leaving no mark if they manage to do any damage. Now, Psychic Blades is not linked to your psychic power, so you don't go and expend a psychic energy die here when you make this attack roll because it's not using your energy die. It's got its own specified damage roll here. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and add this to our Soulknife group. So I'm going to copy this, drag this into place, and make sure that that gets set up that way. Now I'm going to go ahead and add the attack action to this in a moment, but the very first thing I want to do is ensure that our power group is set up to use our dexterity, because that's the ability score that I'm going to choose for this particular character, because they have the higher stat. So next I'm going to add a new cast ability, and I'm simply going to set up the attack roll here, if you will. So this is going to be a melee-based attack. I'm going to set up two then, one for ranged and one for melee. And that goes ahead and sets up our bonus. So you can see here we have a +5 to our modifier. Now our damage is already set up here. We already have 1d6, but we don't have the setup of the second one. So we want to make sure that we actually adjust that slightly. The attack capability is still going to be the same. So we still get our +5 modifier here for a melee-based attack. We are going to add a new damage type. And in this particular case, it's going to be 1d4. So I'm just going to drag a 1d4 into place. And the type of damage that it's going to do is psychic. We also get to modify this so that it takes into account our dexterity modifier. And we also have to do that for the 1d6 damage. We could leave it at base as well. In fact, I'm going to do that because that way if our base changes, if we set it up here in the group, then this will also adjust. So just give me 1 second here to cycle this back around. There we go. Now our damage is set up, but we still don't have our thrown range in here. If it wasn't for the fact that we have to differentiate between a melee and a ranged-based attack, we could theoretically just use this. But because we do have to be able to differentiate between ranged versus melee, we need to add another cast here. And in this particular case, we want to set this up as a ranged attack, but we can leave everything else as it is. So how is this going to work? Well, let's say that we are going to attack this vampire. So I'm going to target the vampire. I am then, when you're in the combat and actions mode here, I'm going to make my attack roll, and let's say I'm in melee range. So I'm going to make my attack. Ooh, nice. I rolled a 20. And then, because this is my primary attack, I'm going to roll 1d6. Now, because I've also used Psychic Blades as my primary attack, I can now make a second attack as part of a bonus action. So I'm going to roll, oops, that doesn't really much matter in this case. That should have been a melee attack roll, but whatever. I'm then going to roll this because this is where the difference comes into play. It's going to be a different damage. So at Rogue level 5, there's going to be a couple of adjustments that we have to make. The first is going to be that because our proficiency has increased, we need to increase the number of psionic die we now have. And that's going to increase from 4 to 6 because it's 2 times our proficiency bonus. The next change we have to make is associated with our psionic die, and that is going to be changing this 1d6 to 1d8 if and only if your dungeon master is allowing you to use this effect this way. If they're making you do this manually, then you're simply going to pick up a 1d8 and roll that in your chat window as opposed to picking up a 1d6. When you use Psychic Whispers, however, you do now get the ability to use a 1d8 to determine how many hours this particular feature is going to last. Now, at Rogue level 9, we're going to want to be sure that we make another adjustment, and that's because our proficiency has gone up to a +4. This means we have to increase the number of psionic die that we have from 6 to 8. And that's before we actually take a look at our features. So this is the first thing you're going to want to do because it's something that's easy to forget. At Rogue level 9, your character gains the Soul Blades feature, giving your character 2 new psionic powers that can be used in relation to your psionic dice. These 2 new powers are called Homing Strikes and Psychic Teleportation. When it comes to the Homing Strikes power, your character essentially can turn the Psychic Blades feature into a homing blade, such that if your character misses with an attack while using a Psychic Blade, then you can roll a 1d8 and add the total of that roll to the attack roll. And that will increase over time, meaning that at this particular level, your character has the ability to roll 1d8. But at later levels, you gain the ability to use a 1d10 or a 1d12 because it's linked directly to the die associated with your energy die. This has the potential to turn that roll from a miss into a hit, of which, if the attack now hits, that's when you get to expend the dice roll. So it functions very similar to Psi-Bolstered Knack in the sense that if you rolled the 1d8 or the 1d10 or the 1d12 and it didn't convert your miss into a hit, you don't expend the dice. And the good news here too is that it can work with both of your Psychic Blade attacks. So if you made your primary attack and missed, and then rolled this Homing Strikes to try to turn that into a hit and still missed, you can still use your second Psychic Blade and attempt to turn that miss also into a hit if you chose to do so. But keep in mind, you're going to expend energy dice if you did in fact connect that and convert that into a hit. And I'll go through and set that up in a moment, but first I want to cover Psychic Teleportation, and it gives your character the means to teleport anywhere from 10 to 120 feet away, depending on the psionic die that you roll, as it's the result of that die roll multiplied by 10 that gives you the distance you cover. At this level, the maximum distance you can cover is 80 feet because you're only able to use a 1d8 for your energy dice. So if your character rolled an 8, the way it works is going to be as follows. By making use of a bonus action, you can choose to manifest one of your Psychic Blades and throw it out to a distance of 10 times the value rolled on a psionic dice roll. So if you rolled an 8 on our example, then you would be able to throw that particular energy blade out 80 feet. As long as that particular space is unoccupied, once the blade arrives, your character will be able to teleport to it at that specific point. And in the process, this will expend an energy die as part of the use of this feature. So let's go ahead and set both of these up. The first thing I'm going to do is drag Soul Blades into place. I'm going to make sure that it's added to our psionic power here because it's going to be linked to our psionic dice. I'm going to rename this to Homing Strikes. I'm then going to drag this in again. Actually, no, I'm going to take Homing Strikes, open that up, and then drop this into place so that we get a copy of it. Then I'm going to call this one Psychic Teleportation. Oops, I still got that wrong. All right, so that sets both of those particular features up. I'm going to minimize this for now so that we don't have that there. In relation to Homing Strikes, I'm going to want to make sure that I set up our energy die use here. Now, this is only going to work if the Dungeon Master is asking you to make use of Fantasy Grounds automation. Much like we set up Psi-Bolstered Knack, we can add an additional attack die here. I'm going to call this an effect here. And I'm going to set it up as homing strikes. Yeah. Semicolon, DMG, colon, no, actually it's ATK, sorry, my apologies, 1d8. It's going to be on self, and it will expire on the next roll. Now, if the Dungeon Master is making use of Fantasy Grounds automation, then the way this is going to work is going to be as follows. I'm going to attack with my Psychic Blade. So I'm going to make an attack roll here. But before I make that attack, I'm going to enable the attack bonus that Homing Strikes is going to give me. Then and only then am I going to roll my attack roll. And you'll see that we have the 1d8 added here. Now, chances are a 9 plus a 7 probably hit, which means this did nothing. But it's artificially inflating our attack roll. This is why most DMs won't allow you to use the automation when it comes to this particular feature. So once again, I'm really showcasing you the wrong way to do it, but I'm doing that intentionally. The right way to do this is to make your attack roll with your Psychic Blades. Chances are that's a hit. Let's see if I can get a miss. Most likely, this will miss depending on the type of character that you're attacking. In this case, the vampire, it definitely misses. I now have the ability to add 1d8 to that attack roll. So in this case, I rolled a 7. That is definitely going to convert this into a hit. At that point, and only at that point, do I expend an energy die, because I've now converted a miss into a hit. Now I can go ahead and roll my damage. So in this particular case, I'm going to do this. And let's say that that was my primary attack. Let me make my secondary attack. That is definitely going to be a miss. Now, if the DM is rolling with automatic crits and automatic fails, this guarantees a miss. You cannot simply take a roll and add in the 1d8 to turn that into a hit. It's not going to work. So I'm glad that that happened. So as part of my attack, I'm now done because I've used both my primary action as well as my bonus action to go do this. Now, if I had rolled the extra 1d8 and still had not hit with that particular attack roll, you would not tick off an energy dice. So that's when you got to be cognizant of when your particular attack changes from a hit to a miss. Or if it doesn't, you don't expend it. This is why some DMs will allow continuous use of the Fantasy Grounds automation despite the inflation of the attack roll, because their assumption is this particular creature, chances are you're most likely going to miss. Now, how Psychic Teleportation works is a little bit different. The way this is going to work is as follows. The first thing you do is roll a dice. In this case, I'm going to be able to jump out 30 feet. So I go ahead and I jump out. It's the wrong one. I go ahead and jump out 30 feet. So I've thrown my Psychic Blade out 30 feet from where my character is standing to an unoccupied location, and then I teleported to there. But each time you make use of Psychic Teleportation, you have to check off that you've used it. So I rolled it 3 additional times past the first one, so I added 3 additional check marks. Now at Rogue level 11, we get to increase the number of our energy dice. So in this particular case, we have a 1d8 here. I'm going to go ahead and modify that now to be a 1d10. The same is going to be said for Psychic or Psi-Bolstered Knack. I'm going to modify that to be a 1d10. But again, homing strikes and Psi-Bolstered attack only come into play if your DM is making use of automation. If you're not, you simply pick up the 1d10 and roll that and add that to your attack rolls. So at Rogue level 13, we do need to increase the number of energy dice that we have because our proficiency is increased to a +5 bonus. So we need to modify the group for Psionic Power, now make use of 10 daily uses of Psionic energy dice. Additionally, at Rogue level 13, your character will gain the Psychic Veil feature, which allows your character to turn themselves and any equipment carried or worn invisible for up to 1 hour. Your character can choose to remove the effect earlier than that, but it can also drop away if you damage another creature or force them to make a saving throw. However, if your attack misses that other creature, the invisible effect remains in place. There are two ways that your character can make use of this feature. The first is simply by using the feature with the expectation that your character will be completing a long rest in order to regain the ability to use it again. The other way is to make use of an energy die, and you go through and expend that energy die in order to reuse this feature multiple times. So you essentially get one free use, and then you get a number of uses equal to your energy die if you choose to use it that way. So this means we need to set it up in two ways. The first, I'm going to link this into our Psionic power group. It doesn't gain any other abilities because it already has the invisibility effect. But we've now linked this into this group, meaning that we've now linked it to our energy dice. At the same time, we need to go ahead and set this up to be linked to our normal Soulknife group, and then simply set up the number of daily uses. That gives us our one free use before we have to go and start using our energy die. Now, the final adjustment we need to make to our character when we hit Rogue level 17 is related once again to the total number of energy die that we have, because we now have our proficiency bonus of +6. That means we can now use up to 12 daily uses of our energy die, meaning we have 12 energy die that we can use throughout the course of a day. I'm going to eliminate those. The last thing that happens at Rogue level 17 is related to the last feature that your character is going to gain, called Rend Mind. And what it does is it gives your character the means to be able to use Psychic Blades as part of your sneak attack, and thus force that target to make a wisdom-based saving throw or be stunned for up to 60 seconds or 1 minute or 10 turns if you're in combat. Obviously, it would be. However, the target can attempt to break out of the stun at the end of their turns by making another wisdom-based saving throw, and if it succeeds, it will no longer be stunned. This feature can only be used once before your character will need to complete a long rest. However, it can also be used again if you choose to expend 3 of your character's psionic dice per use. So, at level 17, for example, you have a total of 12 energy dice. That means you can use this ability a total of 5 times before your character has to complete a long rest, because you will have no energy dice left, plus you will have the free use of Rend Mind already expended. This also means we need to set up Rend Mind in 2 ways. One is going to be linked to our Psionic power, which, where did that go? There it is. The one thing you will want to do is make sure that you pop open this magnifying glass, and that's because it will automatically correct the value for our energy dice roll, or the wisdom saving throw. It also has the stunned effect here, so there's no additional setup we need to do when it comes to setting it up in our power group for Psionic power. We also need to link this to Soulknife, our group there, because we do get quote-unquote 1 free use as a daily use. And I'm pretty certain it's 1. Yeah, long rest. So it's 1 daily use. So now we have set up our total of 5 uses. We have Rend Mind here, if we use it there. And then where is Rend Mind here? There it is. And then we have the ability to use it here. So that's 1 use. That would be a 2nd use. That would be a 3rd use. And that would be our 4th use when it comes to the actual energy dice. So we've now used it a total of 5 times. So how this is going to work is as follows. Let's say that we do have the ability to use sneak attack against the vampire here, because the ape 1 is standing next to our vampire. So I'm going to make my attack roll with Psychic Blades as I normally would. And hopefully I hit. Nope, that's going to be a miss. So let's say next turn, I still have the ability to use it. That's going to be a hit in this particular case. I then will roll my damage as I normally would, which is going to be this particular damage here. But I now have the ability to make use of my sneak attack for its damage. I should have selected this first before I rolled the damage. So, boom. Now I've done the damage from the Soulknife plus all the damage from sneak attack. Now what I get to do is I get to force this vampire to make a wisdom-based saving throw, and I'm going to use my free use. So I'm going to drop that right onto the vampire. I could have just clicked it because I have that vampire targeted. In this case, they succeeded, so they don't get stunned. Let's see if I can trigger a failure. They have failed. They are now stunned for a total of 10 turns. Now, if I make my second attack on that particular creature, you'll notice that you don't get a bonus because there's an advantage and disadvantage that gets canceled out. That's because the vampire was dying. So, ranged attacks have disadvantage when you're attacking something that is prone. Now that this is just simply stunned, I should see that I get the actual dice roll. And it doesn't matter whether I make an attack with melee or range, they both gain the advantage rolls. That's the advantage of stunned, because now I'm almost guaranteed to hit, but you can only use sneak attack once per turn. So I only get to do 1d4 points of damage in this particular case, plus whatever energy bonus I get there. At the end of this particular vampire's turn, so let's say the vampire is now going to have their turn, there's nothing they can really do. They get to make an additional wisdom-based saving throw. And in this case, they succeeded. What that means is that they are no longer stunned. So I'm going to remove the stun effect. And you'll note that I had my player make that saving throw roll. That's because this is going to have all of the appropriate bonuses that need to be compared against when it comes to that saving throw. But that really does bring us to the end where we get to take this character for this particular class and level. And the Psionic Rogue does have the potential to be a really potent character to play. But I think this class specialization is a little weak on some of its capabilities that a typical Psionic character could have. It could make use of the means to read minds, thus giving the class a means to be more functional as a spy, if you will. But other than the class's ability to stun, which you don't really gain until much later levels, it really does not have any other mind-related capabilities beyond the means to communicate with other team members, which does get a little bit more powerful over time. However, this does bring us to the end of this video. I hope you found it useful and informative, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.
I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comments section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.